Hello everyone, and welcome back to NCII's second behavior module. Today's module focuses further on behavioral theory as we take some deeper dives into some of the critical understandings that underlie our approaches in classrooms. Before we get started, a few acknowledgments that we'd like to address to identify those folks who are really behind the scenes, who have really worked hard to get some of this work, a lot of this work, off the ground for us. Our thanks go out to them. Much of the content shared in this module was developed by members of the OSEP-funded National Technical Assistance Center for Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. An additional thanks go out to two of our, in particular, groups, members of our classroom work group, as well as the members of our Northeast PBIS network. Thank you to all those folks.
All right, so we want to spend just a couple minutes giving you an overview of the tools and resources that are available to you in this module number 2. As always, you'll have your module videos. This is where we'll walk you through most of the content. You have your workbook that goes along with the videos. It has some guided notes where a bulk of the content is provided for you, and then you'll be able to complete your activities right there in the workbook. We want to point out one particular piece. There is a lot of behavioral terminology that is coming at you in these first 2 modules, and so we've included a behavioral terms cheat sheet on page 5 of your workbook for module 2 that will review a lot of the terminology that we covered in module 1. You might want to have that open and ready before we dive into module 2. It will help refresh your memory about what we covered in that first module and allow us to build on top of it as we go forward in module 2. And then, as always, we'll provide you with some more information in case you want to dive in more depth to all of this content. You'll have your module readings and additional resources that you can take a look at. In module 2 specifically, we're going to have 3 different types of activities: your stop and jots, your discussion board posts, and your workbook quizzes. Those will be things we do with you as we go through. You'll stop and jot down some ideas to help you apply what we're learning to your context. You'll have an opportunity to post and discuss with colleagues with whom you're completing the course. And then we'll walk you through a couple of workbook quizzes, as we call them, that will help make sure that you're understanding the content as we go through. And then finally, at the end of the module, just like in module 1, you will see a module quiz. The purpose of this quiz is just to self-assess. What content did you pick up really easily? What content might you want to go back and focus on learning a little bit more deeply? As I mentioned, there's a lot of vocabulary in these first 2 modules, and it might take some practice and a couple of repetitions before you're really fluent with it. So we wanted to provide a self-assessment to help you know what you might want to go back and spend a little more time on. All right, now that we've taken a couple of minutes to think about what you'd like to learn about behavior, we want to just frame this content for you. We know that there are a variety of different people who will be accessing these modules. Some of you are pre-service teachers who have yet to get your very first job. Some of you are brand new teachers in your first 1, 2, or 5 years of teaching. And some of you are really experienced teachers with lots of experience with kids with disabilities and kids in general education. And the way each group of you will access this content changes a little bit. And so if you're in a pre-service program and you're really learning this content for the first time and you don't yet have teaching experience, we want you to focus on learning the content and the theory. Become fluent with the ideas that we present here. Look for examples in your clinic placements, and when you go into schools, look for examples of how this theory plays out. Consider video recording or asking for feedback on some of your lessons. So if you're just trying out, if you're student teaching, if you're just trying out some of these practices, once we get into specific practices in this module, consider asking your cooperating teacher or to give you some feedback on your use of those practices, or video recording yourself and self-assessing, and we'll give you some tools to do that. But if you're a pre-service teacher, think about it as a way to look for examples, practice implementing some of the skills, and really become fluent in the theory. For new teachers, you have a lot on your plates. And some of this might be familiar to you. You may have had some of this information presented to you during your pre-service program, or maybe you learned some of it once you got hired. But we want you to focus on moving from what you know to actual practice. We'll talk about this as we go through, but one of the real challenges with behavioral skills is not that each individual skill is really difficult on its own to implement. It's putting the whole puzzle together in a way that is effective in your classroom and actually improves student behavior. And so we want you to really focus on moving from your theoretical knowledge of what behavioral support looks like towards implementation. And so really think about what would be a reasonable implementation goal for yourself, and either self-assess or ask a coach or a cooperating teacher for feedback on that goal, so you can start to see whether you're able to improve your implementation of these practices as we go through. And when practice isn't working, when you try something in your classroom and it doesn't seem to be working, use your underlying understanding of this theory to modify it. So if you've got a situation where you're trying something and it doesn't seem to be effective with your students, come back to the content in these first introductory modules. Think about the theory of behavior and think about how you can modify the practice to make it a better fit for the students that you're working with and the classroom that you're working in. And for our experienced teachers, a lot of this probably will sound familiar to you, and we want you we want to honor that and recognize that, and have you think about using this content as an opportunity for self-reflection. We all have patterns of strengths and weaknesses, and all of us can continue to improve in our behavioral support for kids, particularly with disabilities, but really for all kids. So just like the new teachers, think about your own practice, think about where you've developed habits that you'd like to begin to change, and think about how you can set a new implementation goal for yourself to improve your own practice. In addition, you're likely in a role of mentoring new teachers, and think about how you can help support that group of teachers to learning these practices potentially faster and more effectively than you did when you first started in this role. So depending on where you're at in your teaching career, the way we're suggesting you approach this content varies a little bit, from just learning the theory and kind of getting an understanding all the way down to how do you help others learn it and how could you become a coach or a mentor as we go through it. But we hope this helps you think through how to approach the content.
Before we move into the content for today, and as you'll see as a theme across all 8 of these modules, we'll spend a few minutes talking about the model that you have now become familiar with, known as a DBI for Intensive Academic Need. This graphic, as I step out of your way, you should be familiar with at this point if you've worked through the literacy modules from NCII. Through this graphic, you should come to understand that we're trying to identify how to best and most appropriately match students' needs to appropriate evidence-based academic interventions and supports. From a behavioral standpoint, what we've done through these modules is map that understanding onto the work we'll be talking about. So first, as Jen mentioned last time, from a behavior standpoint, we're focusing first and foremost at the Tier 1 level, at the whole school level. Within the classroom environment, what we're going to be talking about across these modules are the 5 critical features of evidence-based classroom management. Our hope is that with deep understanding around these 5 areas, a classroom teacher should and would be able to monitor students' behavior appropriately, and that's speaking to all students in their classroom. So across the next few modules, beyond Module 2, what you'll notice is we'll take a deep dive into these 5 areas and explain and talk through what they look like, how they can be implemented, and how they can be monitored. And that's the second piece of our model here, how to implement with fidelity. We'll talk at length about how to monitor each of these 5 elements with fidelity and with integrity. Beyond that, once the cycle has begun and you are monitoring each of these evidence-based classroom management features, we will then begin talking about how you can progress monitor student support. As you're monitoring student support, this is hopefully a cyclical and flexible process over the course of your school year. You should be able to implement efficiently some quick diagnostic assessments which help inform the type of intervention adaptations you may use with a particular student or group of students. Similar to the conversations and understandings you have around academics, here with behavior we might be looking at how we can increase the frequency, the duration, or the precision within one of those 5 critical areas of classroom management. Upon further progress monitoring and evaluation and conversation, we should then also be able to make determinations around the effectiveness of each of our classroom management structures and how those structures are supporting each of our students. If effective, that should be celebrated and sustained across time. If groups of students continue to have challenging behaviors in your classroom, we would then move into a more at-risk or Tier 2 level of support around behavior. So again, we'll come back to this model across these modules and keep revisiting it as a consistent theme, and this is a good explanation of how our map parallels the DBI academic map that you have become familiar with. So within Module 2, we have developed 2 separate parts. I'll walk you through Part 1. I'll then turn the reins over to Jen. We'll pick up with Part 2. Within Part 1, we'll redefine the ABCs of behavior that we discussed in Module 1, and we'll then focus on the setting event component of this 4-term contingency. I'll have a couple activities embedded within there and some hands-on learning for you. I'll then turn it over to Jen where she'll go deeper into some of the verbiage and critical understandings that underlies our practices related to behavior in the classroom. Jen will talk about the idea of shaping, the concept of chaining, prompting, stimulus control, as well as walking through the different phases of learning that we talk about when we speak to how do we explicitly teach students' behaviors in the classroom.